This issue was of such supreme importance that Justice Jackson was prepared to forego the trial rather than to surrender it. He declared, "We want this group of nations to stand up and say that launching a war of aggression is a crime and that no political or economic situation can justify it." Justice Jackson's argument prevailed, and in the final draft of the charter, the planning, preparation, initiation, or waging of a war of aggression was declared to be criminal. The remaining task was to persuade the tribunal to advance the international law of crimes by finding the accomplices of the tyrant Adolf Hitler guilty of this crime. There is no need to repeat before this audience, so sophisticated in the Nuremberg proceedings, the monumental contribution of Justice Jackson in organizing and directing the American prosecution at Nuremberg. The task facing him was staggering. He had to obtain the agreement of the Allies to a military trial, negotiate with them the organization, jurisdiction, and procedure of the tribunal, join with them in the identification of the persons to be accused, and prepare suitable indictments, find a site for the trial, see to the availability of a courtroom, prison, and other facilities, supervise the housing and feeding of lawyers and others participating in the trial, select the members of his legal staff, and personally conduct and direct the prosecution of the case on behalf of the United States. With characteristic drive and enthusiasm, Justice Jackson set about promptly to overcome all obstacles and achieve a fair trial of the hated leaders of Nazi Germany. His opening speech to the tribunal has been repeatedly acknowledged as a forensic masterpiece. He closed that speech with these words: "It is not necessary, among the ruins of this ancient and beautiful city, with untold numbers of its civilian inhabitants still buried in its rubble, to argue the proposition that to start an aggressive war has the moral qualities of the worst of crimes. The refuge of the defendants can be only their hope that international law will lag so far behind the moral sense of mankind that conduct, which is a crime in the moral sense, must be regarded as innocent in law. Civilization asks whether law is so laggard as to be utterly helpless to deal with crimes of this magnitude by criminals of this order of importance. It does not expect that you can make war impossible. It does expect that your judicial action will put the focus of international law, its precepts, its prohibitions, and most of all, its sanctions, on the side of peace, so that men and women of goodwill in all countries may have leave to live by no man's leave underneath the law." Justice Jackson's decision that the American case should be primarily documentary led to the introduction of German orders and decrees establishing irrefutably the massive crimes charged in the indictment. In his closing speech, Justice Jackson recited the role of each defendant in the conspiracy. He concluded his summation with this peroration: "It is against such a background that these defendants now ask this tribunal to say that they are not guilty of planning, executing, or conspiring to commit this long list of crimes and wrongs. They stand before the record of this trial as blood-stained Gloucester stood by the body of his slain king. He begged of the widow, as they beg of you, 'Say I slew them not.' And the queen replied, 'Then say they were not slain, but dead they are.' If you were to say of these men that they are not guilty, it would be as true to say that there has been no war, there are no slain, there has been no crime." In its judgment, the tribunal held individual defendants guilty of committing massive war crimes and crimes against humanity. In addition, it upheld the proposition that to initiate and wage aggressive war is criminal in international law, and that individuals who make the political decisions for aggression may be held personally accountable for this crime. War is essentially an evil thing, the tribunal said. The consequences are not confined to the belligerent states alone, but affect the whole world. To initiate a war of aggression, therefore, is not only an international crime, it is the supreme international crime, differing only from other war crimes in that it contains within itself the accumulated evil of the whole. This principle, set out in the Charter and confirmed and applied by the tribunal, was Jackson's crowning contribution to international law at Nuremberg. Never before had any man been held guilty of the crime of waging aggressive war. Since Nuremberg, no man can claim ignorance of this crime. In his final address to the tribunal, Justice Jackson prophesied, "It is common to think of our own time as standing at the apex of civilization, from which the deficiencies of preceding ages may be patronizingly viewed in the light of what is assumed to be progress. The reality is that in the long perspective of history, the present century will not hold an admirable position unless its second half is to redeem its first. These 20 years in the 20th century will be recorded in the book of years as one of the most bloody in all annals. If we cannot eliminate the causes and prevent the repetition of these barbaric events, it is not an irresponsible prophecy to say that this 20th century may yet succeed in bringing the doom of civilization." We are but 4 years now from the end of the 20th century. Despite repeated acts of aggression and the commission of war and humanitarian crimes since Nuremberg, the prospect that the century will end in peace through enforcement of the principles proposed by Justice Jackson and adopted by the International Military Tribunal is now a virtual certainty. At century's end, the Nuremberg precedent is being applied to the war crimes tribunals established by the Security Council for the former Yugoslavia and Rwanda. Judge Richard Goldstone, the chief prosecutor for these tribunals, said recently, "One of the beacons to shine out of the 20th century is the trial of the major war criminals at Nuremberg. That trial and the principles of law which it produced was the achievement, more than any other man, of Justice Robert H. Jackson. It will long emblazon the aspirations of man for peace." Justice Jackson died at 11:45 a.m., October 9, 1954, in Washington, after being stricken by a heart attack. He was only 62 years of age. He had already contributed significantly to the progress of law and justice in the United States through 3 careers. In his 4th career, as the United States Chief of Counsel before the International Military Tribunal at Nuremberg, he contributed more than any other person in this century to the advancement of the international law of crimes and the cause of world peace under law.